Hi, this is Nahid and welcome. We've started you out on this journey by collecting data on you as you are now. And this is an excellent way to quickly identify gaps in your effectiveness and help you make immediate changes. Today, we're going to give you a skills based framework for leadership. In other words, if we were to start with a completely blank slate and identify the top skills it would take to be a great leader, what would they be? And how can you start developing and mastering these skills right now? I've divided the skills up into five major categories: strategic thinking, clear communication, systemized productivity, self mastery, and developing thriving people systems. Within each of these categories are a wide variety of sub-skills, so we'll go over them one by one. Let's start with strategic thinking. Most people like to think they're strategic and they want to be seen as strategic, but I'm pretty sure different people have different ideas of what this is based on how they think. In my book, there are several different aspects of strategic thinking, and they're all valuable: landscape, vision, path, focus, perspectives, decisions, and pivots. These are the names I've given to each of these aspects. Let's go over them one by one. So, landscape or global thinking is the ability to rise up 50,000 feet and look at the entire industry you're in to see how it's moving at a macro level. This means noticing things like how peripheral industries, social movements, politics, regulations, changes in the environment, people's belief systems, and other things going on in the world now or in the future might impact things. This is the type of thinking that helps you choose long term moves for yourself or your organization that are not obvious to others and might not pay off for decades. But these are the moves that position you and your organization for incredible success in the future. A great question to ask yourself to start developing this kind of thinking is: how is the world or how is my industry changing? And how might that impact me or my organization? Being right or wrong isn't really important because no one can truly guess how all the variables will ultimately play out. But just asking yourself this question over and over again and talking to others about it will give you a perspective that for many people isn't even on the radar. Vision is a way of thinking about the future that brings exciting emotional clarity to a goal. For example, the goal of completing a marathon is just a goal, but the vision of this goal can play like a movie in your head. You're running across the finish line in triumph, feeling the sweat and the exhaustion, but also the exhilaration of finally making it, hearing the voice on the loudspeaker announcing your name, and seeing your friends and fans cheering you on. That vision is what can keep you motivated and working towards a goal, no matter how tough it gets. A good leader inspires people by describing the vision to people over and over again. This is part of communication, of course, but you can't communicate something convincingly that you can't see and genuinely get excited about yourself. To practice this, try to get yourself to imagine achieving an important goal and create an exciting movie in your head about it. See if you can get yourself and others excited by talking about it. People talk about visionary leaders all the time, and usually they're referring to those inspiring people who are getting people excited about the future. Sometimes it seems like they have their heads in the clouds. So keep in mind that vision is just one part, albeit an important part, of strategic thinking. I use the word path to describe the most common way that people think of strategic thinking, and that is the ability to clearly see and map out the way to get what we want. Once you have a goal, to be able to find and see the way guiding others along as you go. I often like to simplify things by saying that strategy is simply asking the how question. How will we get there? How will we make this happen? But it's actually a little more than that. If someone asks you, what's your strategy? They aren't really just asking you, how do you want to do this step one, two, three? They're asking, what is the best approach in your opinion? Back to the marathon goal. Do you want to build up slowly and do longer runs every week to increase your stamina? Or do you want to alternate shorter and longer runs every week to protect your bones and muscles? Strategy is about thoughtfully considering different approaches to accomplishing something and then taking action based on your decision. People who are more tactical are great at executing once a decision's been made, but they'd rather be the ones to make something happen than the one to consider all the different ways it could be approached. To practice path thinking, ask yourself, what approach am I choosing to take? And what are other approaches I could take, but I'm choosing not to take, and why? Again, you don't have to be right. The point is to consciously choose an approach and have reasoning behind it. The next aspect of strategic thinking is focus. When I say focus, I'm not talking about just having the ability to focus. Leaders must guide the focus of others. And in order to do this, they must know the most important thing to do and why it's most important. For example, if we go back to our marathon example, maybe we've decided that the most important thing to focus on is building cardio fitness. Or we could decide that the most important thing is building running technique. Both of these things are important. But given that people don't have a lot of time, knowing the most important thing or the top three most important things will guide their decisions about how to manage their time. Too many leaders fail to identify clear priorities, and then they find out too late that deadlines will be missed because people are stretched too thin. To practice the thinking related to focus, ask yourself what is most important and why when it comes to your goals. Being able to answer this question decisively has exponentially more impact with every additional person you're leading. I include perspectives in my list of different aspects of strategic thinking because developing good strategy always involves the ability to see things from multiple perspectives. A military strategist will see the battlefield from his opponent's perspective. He'll guess at their objectives and possible moves, and then he'll create his strategy based on that. A business strategist will do the same in the marketplace, anticipating competitor moves. A master negotiator will understand the agendas of all the players, or at least guess at them. And whether you're navigating corporate politics or the decision making process of a single prospect, making good guesses at what the issues look like from their point of view gives you a leg up. Unfortunately, we tend to oversimplify the agendas of others, and we also tend to mistakenly assume that people's behaviors have to do with us. For example, he's trying to make me uncomfortable. She's trying to embarrass me. They want to take my project away. Keep in mind that people are mostly self absorbed, trying to achieve their own goals and solve their own problems. So don't focus too much on the negative impact of their behavior. Think about it from their perspective. Two good questions to ask yourself to practice perspective shifting are, what might I be thinking and feeling if I were in their shoes? Or what might they be trying to achieve or solve? Seeing situations from all angles gives you an edge when it comes to bringing people together around a shared purpose. Decision making is also an important part of strategic thinking in my book because one of the key measures of the most effective CEOs is their ability to make decisions. Decisions are tough, and these days you'll never have all the information you need to confidently make a right decision. You might notice the theme of being right not being the goal here. It takes a lot of courage to make decisions that impact a lot of people, and then to stand in that uncomfortable place of not knowing how things will play out, but while still owning your decision and all the consequences of it. Although sometimes this takes more emotional courage than intellect, there's still a way to think about decisions that's strategic. And typically it involves scenario analysis. The best decision makers are able to map out multiple scenarios in their mind and then act swiftly. I'm not a chess player myself, but I hear chess being used as a metaphor for strategy all the time because chess players have to think several moves ahead while holding several different scenarios in their heads, since they can never know exactly which move their opponent will make. So I might say that a good way to practice strategic decision making is to practice playing chess. Or if you're not a chess player like me, maybe you ask yourself, what are my options? What is the best, worst, and possible, maybe probable outcome of each option? And then how will I handle each of those outcomes? And then make a choice. I actually have a decision tool that I use with clients that has you draw out all of your options, best, worst, and probable outcomes, and kind of work through this thinking process as a tool. And it's really popular. So, the good news about decision making is that with the world moving faster, people don't really expect decisions to be right, and constant change is the norm. So, pivoting is becoming a normal part of the business vocabulary. The strategic part of pivoting is knowing when to stick with a decision you've made and when to pivot. Decisions often come with investments, resource allocation, and project work that cannot be undone. So, in some cases, the wisest course of action is to stay the course through to an outcome that makes sense or that gets you some benefit. But other times, the wisest course of action is to pull out of a project and stop the bleeding. A good way to think about pivoting is asking yourself, what am I trying to learn with each decision I make? And what will determine when I change course? Your thinking process then develops to accommodate an ever changing environment. You take a step, and then you learn something, and then maybe you shift perspectives, and then maybe you learn something more. Then maybe you rise up 50,000 feet, and check the landscape, and then you maybe analyze some scenarios, and then you take another step, or maybe you turn. Decision making and pivoting can be more of an art than a science. And so, with that in mind, the best way to develop the skill is to get in there and practice. I went into a lot of detail with strategic thinking because, from my experience, that is a skill set a lot of people aren't clear on. Here's a table that summarizes key questions you can ask yourself to practice thinking more strategically. As we go through the rest of these skills, I think you'll find them more familiar, and many of them you'll already be working on. If you'd like, feel free to take a screenshot of this slide. I think we all know how important clear communication is, but communication isn't just about talking coherently, and I think that's where people tend to get stuck. Communication is so crucial to effective leadership that we could probably create 20 different ways to develop this skill set. But I'm honing in on 7 areas where I see the biggest difference in effectiveness between those who are highly skilled and those who aren't. These are simple messaging, making connections, facilitating, storytelling, listening, feedback, and conflict. Let's start with simple messaging. I've coached leaders who are crystal clear on their strategy and vision and have communicated it several times to their teams, in fact, to the entire organization. But still, people in the organizations will be confused and saying things like, "Oh, well, we don't really have a strategy. So why do you think this is?" Well, it's not because there's no strategy, and it's not because it hasn't been communicated. It's because it hasn't been understood and remembered. When you're communicating to others, simple messages have more power. Most people don't know the mission statement of their organization, but if you have something simple like save the whales or feed the world, you can't forget it. You don't have to be a brilliant copywriter or come up with anything snazzy, but you do have to be willing to create simple phrases and repeat, repeat, repeat until you hear others say what you were saying without being prompted, or maybe until you see behaviors changing. A good way to practice this is to take any situation where you want to see change and repeat a simple message. So I have a client who really wanted to see people more engaged in meetings. He would be on Zoom meetings all day, and half the people had their cameras off. And so he would start saying things like, and he kept this very simple, I want a cameras on meeting so we can really connect. And he would say this over and over again several times per day at every meeting he was on. He told me that in just a few weeks, the meetings he attended changed from 80% of participants with cameras off to about 95 participants with cameras on. So this kind of repetition works. Give it a try and see. Most people who are on the front lines or even just a level or two down from you will not see things the way you do. They just don't have the vantage point to understand how all the pieces fit together. They just have their job and their responsibilities each day. It's the leader's job to make that connection or bridge the gap between the ordinary tasks people are trying to cross off their to do list every day to the larger goals and objectives of the organization. I once had an introverted leader who didn't like talking and mingling much, but he was an excellent writer. And he had this strategy where each month he wrote an email to his entire region. So every employee in his region got this email, and he would share the results of the key performance indicators and cheer everybody on for how great the results were. Or if they were negative results, he'd talk about that too. But he went a little further than that. He proceeded to call out the little things that people did each day, usually in the positive results, that led to the positive results. So, for example, from smiling and genuinely connecting with people coming in for appointments to having organized systems for covering each other's shifts, he showed how each of these littler things directly impacted bigger things, like, for example, customer retention. Besides helping people feel good about their role in the results, he reinforced those behaviors that made a difference, and he ensured that they'd continue. The best way to practice this skill is to give someone positive feedback, including the impact their behavior had. So, for example, instead of just saying, "Hey, thanks for doing that, I really appreciate it," you might want to say, "The fact that you stayed late to get this done gained the company about 12,000 in extra revenue because it enabled us to get our website back up and processing sales one day sooner." So now your team member is not only going to feel good that you appreciate him, but he's going to be more likely to stay after to get the job done in the future, knowing that you value the impact that makes. You might not think of facilitation as a specific communication skill, maybe more of a training skill, but think about how much people hate going to meetings. What if the people running those meetings were expert facilitators and could get people to engage in productive conversation about issues that mattered, all the while leaning in to moving the agenda forward and ending the meeting on time with everyone completely clear on decisions and follow up actions? In his book, Death by Meeting, Patrick Lenciani said that if you're a leader, running and attending meetings is your job. So you should love being in meetings and you should get a lot out of them. And I say you should know how to run meetings well in order to get the most out of them. So that's why I see facilitation as an important skill for leaders, managers, business owners, anyone who spends a good portion of their work life in meetings. If you want to get better at running meetings, I highly recommend Patrick Lenciani's book, Death by Meeting, but it's even more important to practice. The best way to get started is to think of the meetings you already have on your calendar. If someone else is running the meeting, observe what they do that works well and what doesn't work so well. And when you're running the meeting, take a few minutes after each meeting to reflect on how it went and what you can do to level up the experience next time. Your colleagues will appreciate it. More and more people are talking about the art of storytelling these days because studies have proven that humans learn and remember through stories. Stories captivate and inspire people, and this is the way to get buy in for your ideas. As most leaders know, just having a big job title with the associated authority doesn't actually give you as much power as you'd expect. It's hard to keep people focused and motivated and working hard on the right things. And the stories you tell are powerful influencing tools. To practice storytelling, start by noticing how often stories already exist in your life. If you like to watch TED Talks, you'll notice that most speakers start with a personal story to draw you in. When you watch advertisements, you'll notice that the most interesting ones are telling some version of a story of a customer who had a problem and was made happy by the product or service. You may have a charismatic friend who's always engaging people with funny stories, and you can watch them in action. Keep in mind that we use testimonials to inspire potential customers because personal stories are captivating. Think about where you could use storytelling to inspire people at work. One simple formula is to think about a behavior you'd like people to be doing, and then create a story of someone who had a problem, did that behavior, and became happy in some way. As an example, let's say you want to see people drinking more water. You might create a story of someone who had headaches all the time because they were dehydrated. They started drinking 8 glasses of water a day, and suddenly their headaches went away. It sounds simplistic, but once you start looking for it, you'll see it all over. Listening is one of those tricky skills that feels harder the more you master it. Unfortunately, people who believe they're good listeners are usually the worst listeners of all. As you put effort into practicing listening, the first thing you notice is how often you're actually not listening, and that makes you feel like a bad listener, but it's actually a sign you're improving. As we master listening, we become even more aware of our background thinking whenever it interferes with our focus. One way to practice listening is to get really interested in understanding someone's perspective. This primes your brain to focus on the other person instead of taking on the default position of simply waiting for your turn to talk. We tend to brush off the skill of listening thinking that we already know how to do it. But in the classes I teach, I'll often have people do an exercise where they write down the times they felt truly heard, and they're completely shocked at how rarely they experience that. If you happen to be one of those rare bosses who listens hard enough and genuinely enough so that your direct reports do feel heard, then you'll likely inspire great loyalty and ultimately have your pick of high performers vying to be on your team. The effort you put into improving this skill pays back in spades. Feedback. I don't think there's ever a moment in an organization when everyone is performing perfectly. People need constant feedback to keep them on track and constantly improving. A lot of managers don't bother to give feedback until the former performance review every year, and I think this is because giving feedback tends to be uncomfortable. But that's like turning off your navigation system on a plane and just leaving it off, hoping you'll get to your destination on time. The best managers build feedback into daily conversations so that it's natural, comfortable, expected, and mostly positive. And then this allows them to proactively prevent ineffective behaviors and habits from taking hold and interfering with productivity. The key to giving great feedback is to never make it personal. It's simply about which behaviors work relatively better or worse when it comes to achieving our mutual objectives. If giving feedback makes you uncomfortable, we have a video class worksheet and script that you can use to walk through the process. The gap in performance between teams who have regular feedback built into their communication systems and those who don't is striking. It's well worth the effort to get good at this and do it consistently. Conflict is one of those awkward things that some people pride themselves in avoiding and others pride themselves in creating. Both approaches are completely ineffective. There's a difference between destructive conflict and productive conflict, and studies show that the one key skill that sets apart the top 1% of effective people and organizations is their grace and poise when it comes to handling and leaning into productive conflict. This means they can talk about the elephant in the room without upsetting people. They can get sensitive issues discussed and resolved, and they can model respectful conversations that embrace diverse perspectives in the name of better decision making. If you get embarrassed or defensive during conflict, Or if you notice people shutting down when you directly address issues, working on developing your conflict management skills can make a huge difference in your effectiveness. Often, conflict management is not something you can improve until you've spent time working on self mastery and emotional intelligence, which starts with understanding your triggers and discovering how conflict causes you stress. As you gain insights into your own responses to conflict, you can develop ways to lower your stress and enter challenging conversations with the positive energy that builds psychological safety for all involved. This takes time, but again, it's a skill that sets apart the top 1%, so well worth the effort. So there you have it, the 7 aspects of communication that, when improved, will get you a huge result in terms of inspiring performance, preventing problems, and building a strong reputation as a truly effective leader. Simple messages so people remember the mission, bridges so people see the importance of the little things they do each day, facilitation to improve the meeting experience and to make it more valuable, storytelling to inspire people, listening for more reasons than I can list, feedback for continuous improvement, and productive conflict to prevent miscommunication, draw out important ideas, and make far better decisions. The next skill set that's key to leadership success is what I call systemized productivity. And the reason I call it that is because I like to combine these 3 ideas: working productively, being organized, and 3, creating systems and processes that continuously support productivity and organization. These ideas aren't necessarily connected, in that there are several people out there who are organized yet not productive. And there are others who work productively, but they're not necessarily organized. Developing systems and processes is a skill set in itself. There's also a difference when you apply these skills individually and when you apply them to a team you lead or when you apply them to the whole organization. So I like to take meeting management as an example because systemizing the way you run meetings can gain you efficiencies at several levels at once. However, the thinking and practice related to systemized thinking is the same. I generally have you follow 5 basic principles. Number 1 is understand and apply the 80/20 rule. So you know how to prioritize and you know how to make sure you're doing the 20% that will get you the 80% of your results. The second thing is to design periods of time into the day where you and others are working on what's most important with complete focus. The third principle is to be selective about what you and your organization take on. And I often remind my business owners that they're going to be a lot more effective if they limit themselves to 2 big initiatives per quarter, sometimes even 1 initiative per quarter, which feels hard to do because they have so many great ideas, but it increases success dramatically. 4, systemize everything that repeats. So there should be processes in place for everything that happens regularly, meetings, certain kinds of conversations, email management, in addition to bigger things like quality control, marketing, etc. This does not take away from your ability to be creative, by the way. It actually supports it. And 5, a place for everything. People waste so much time looking for things so that if you design an environment that eliminates that, it really supports productivity. If you just focus on these 5 things and apply them everywhere, to yourself individually, to anything you do with your team or with others, and across your organization wherever you have influence, you won't only be several times more productive and effective, but your whole presence will change. And you'll show up to others as if you have it together, which is incredibly important for a leader. Speaking of having it together, we all run into situations where we kind of have to fake it until we make it. And that's an important skill to have. But we can only fake in moments here and there, maybe to pull off an important meeting or an important presentation. The people who work with you more frequently will sense more of the real you, no matter how much you try to control your outer appearance. When you feel stressed, frustrated, overwhelmed, or otherwise not like you have it all together, Others will pick up on your anxious, frustrated, or withdrawn energy, whether you like it or not. When you feel any degree of stress or negative emotions, others will pick up on your energy and it will make them feel bad, but they won't know what you're really thinking and feeling. So they'll come to their own conclusions based on how they feel around you. This is why people who are shy and withdrawn are often misunderstood and labeled as arrogant or standoffish. And leaders whose stress shows up as impatience or frustrations will often be surprised that they're accused of yelling or emotional abuse. And those whose stress tends to show up as anxiety or overwhelm can be mislabeled as intense or pushy or complainers, sort of depending on the context. The bottom line is when it comes to self mastery, it's your job to find a way to get your stress down and your confidence up. The best leaders are able to create an environment for themselves to thrive in, no matter what others in the environment, including their own bosses, are actually doing. Practicing self mastery involves self observation, reflection, and experimenting with different behaviors. That's why a trigger log is an ideal tool because jotting down triggers forces you to self observe. And once you have enough entries, you'll notice and can reflect on patterns, and you'll always get insights that will lead to new ideas of behaviors you can try in different situations. The deeper journey of self mastery leads to clarifying your values and purpose while also discovering the core thinking patterns and beliefs that motivate you and that can also sometimes trap you in self defeating behavior patterns. The great thing about this deeper work is that it does transform you over time so that you become more confident and more happy from the inside out. And that leads to an inner calm, peace, and confidence that emanates forth in your energy throughout the day. And it grounds you even during the most stressful situations. This energy infects everyone around you in a positive way. They won't know exactly what you're thinking or feeling, but they'll feel good about you. They'll feel good around you and they'll want to be around you. And this real confidence and positivity emanating through in your energy whenever you interact with people is authentic leadership presence. Most of the leadership skills we've already discussed will naturally lead to building thriving people systems, which is our fifth category. But there's more advanced honing once you get to this level. Coaching and mentoring involves deep listening, providing feedback, and creating a safe emotional environment that naturally builds trust and inspires people to grow. You'll get these skills from some of the other things that we've mentioned earlier. But what I would add here is as an additional skill is learning how to ask empowering and provocative questions and mastering the art of giving guidance without over advising. There's also an art to figuring out where the boundaries are as you work to build a close personal and supportive relationship while also retaining your ability to deliver tough news and hold people accountable when they aren't performing. Modeling effective behavior is going to happen more and more naturally as you work on your self mastery. It's just important to note here that we're all human and flawed. So, as a leader, you should know that your personality and natural behavior is the leading influencer of culture within your sphere of influence. For example, if you're indecisive and disorganized, you're likely to have an indecisive and disorganized team. Modeling is the most potent form of influence as a leader or parent. So, working on yourself and showing up as your best self is not just about you, it's also going to show up on your team. When it comes to building a high performing team, the skills we've already discussed will get you most of the way there. Clear communication, good organizational and facilitation skills, self confidence, and emotional intelligence create the right environment for teams to thrive. But it's also helpful to learn about team dynamics and consciously create systems that build trust and accountability among team members. The ultimate goal is to create a team that can make decisions and essentially manage itself and do well without you there most of the time. Instead of dealing with people running to you to resolve issues between them, Your time should be spent looking to the future and propelling the team to the next level. Patrick Lenciani has a powerful model that stands the test of time, which he introduces in his book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. If you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about team development, this is a great book to read and will help you get started. Culture building is incredibly hard to do, so I would put this skill on the advanced list. Culture is invisible, and most of us can't even articulate our current culture because it's like asking a fish to see the water it's swimming in. But suffice it to say that creating culture starts with you and your personality, modeling the way we do things here. And once you're clear on that way, your job is to kind of seep it into the psyche of the entire organization. It usually takes a team of highly self aware people to consciously facilitate a culture change. But if you can do it, the payoff is huge because culture to an organization is like belief systems to individuals. It basically dictates your behavior without you knowing it. And if you can create a culture that drives positive, productive behaviors, you've created an organization with secret powers. Culture is not something a competitor could easily copy. We've already talked about systems in our productivity category, but it's worth mentioning again because there's also invisible systems related to people in the organization that you can consciously embed into the culture. These systems, whether they're written down or not, cement the positive behavior that your culture drives. They also support growth and innovation and embed values and ways of thinking and decision making so deeply into the organization that people naturally organize themselves so things run smoothly. The best example I can think of right now related to this is traffic. We have traffic systems that are pretty global in nature, and we learn the rules of the road when we learn to drive. But for most of us, once we've gotten our license, we drive on our own for decades. We make all of our own decisions. During that time, we might make some mistakes, get some tickets, have a few accidents, but for the vast majority of our life, we're in a system, barely conscious of that system, and self-organizing in a way that if you're in a helicopter looking down at the streets of a big city, you might actually wonder who's organizing all that traffic and why there aren't more accidents. And the answer is no one person. And that's eventually what you want to see in your organization. Once you get to that point, you're managing the system, not individual people. This is a skill that, again, I would put in the highly advanced category. And the best way to practice it is to work on the other skills so that you can build to a level where you're working on this kind of scale. So here we are, what I would call a pretty complete list of leadership skills to work on. These skills take decades to master, even with conscious practice, but you should know that most leaders don't do this work. So, no matter where you are on your leadership journey, just taking the time now to practice and improve some of these skills by 10 to 20% will give you an edge. And if you develop a habit of consciously working to develop your leadership skills, you'll be surprised at how fast you'll advance compared to others. So, where to start? I always have clients start with the trigger log. Why? Because it supports you in developing all of your skills starting where you are right now. It gives you the information you need to make some immediate adjustments in the short term and get some quick wins, while also giving you the information you need to embark on a deeper self discovery journey and truly transform yourself. The trigger log starts with self mastery, building your self awareness and emotional intelligence. As you develop self mastery, your communication skills naturally improve because you're naturally less stressed and reactive, and that calm energy is attractive to others, leading to better interactions all around. You also get braver about choosing what you will and will not spend your time on, and this makes it easier to focus on one thing without allowing interruptions and the demands of others to hijack your concentration. Once you've worked on yourself, it's much easier to become an effective leader of others. And that calm confidence gives you the mental space to learn how to think in new ways. asking yourself the more challenging questions and letting go of having to know so that you can learn. This is why we start with a trigger log. It's your leverage point for both short term and long term growth. So, I know this is a lot to think about. Keep in mind that leadership is a long journey. Often, young leaders expect to climb into a high level position in just a few years, but that's usually because they don't have enough experience to see what they don't know yet. For most leaders, it takes decades to develop even a fraction of these skills. And what you're doing by investing your time and energy into learning what it takes to be a great leader and practicing step by step is going to really accelerate the process, paving the way to living into your full leadership potential. So, congratulations for taking it this far, and don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Enjoy this journey.